Hi. Hello, I hope you're taking care of yourself. If you're new here, my name is Lexi, and today we are talking about everything that I read in September and October. Back as promised to at least mostly regularly scheduled bi-monthly programming. This video is coming out a little bit late. It's probably like the middle of November, and you can blame the flu for that. I was knocked out pretty bad at the beginning of this month. But we have 9 books to get through in this wrap up, and the ratings for this video are going to span like the full range of 1 to 5 stars. They might even be on like a standard distribution, actually. That's kind of neat. How am I doing on my reading goal? Great question. Not well, but that's okay. We have time. We have both time and also an unexpected hero that has just dropped into my life. More on that later on in this video. If you have never seen one of these videos before from me, first of all, hello, welcome. This is my customary spoiler policy that I do at the start of every wrap up. I do not spoil anything in these videos that I would personally consider to be a spoiler. What that means is I try really hard not to say anything that you couldn't learn either from the back of the book or the first like 50 to 100 pages. And the reason for that is if you like the sound of a book that I talk about in this video, whether I liked it or not, I want you to be able to experience that completely unvarnished. That is why I do this. That's like half of the point of this channel beyond just trying to be funny. But obviously I do still review these books. I'm giving you my thoughts, feelings, and opinions and talking very generally and unspecifically about why I feel the way that I do. But okay, that's the preamble, I think. Before we get into the actual wrap up, I just have a quick word from the sponsor of today's video, which is Skillshare. Are you starting to feel like the year is getting dangerously close to ending without you having amounted to anything? Have you mostly failed in the face of daily grind and monotony to do things that you actually like? Is the only real difference between you last year and you now the fact that you are slightly angrier and slightly closer to death? Don't worry, okay? It's not too late. You can still carve out time for your passions and also find new passions. And a really cool place to do that is with Skillshare. Skillshare is a platform that is dedicated to making it as easy and fun as possible for you to learn how to do all of the really fun new things in life that you've always meant to try. Especially if that hobby is something creative, Skillshare has so many classes that are taught by experts in things like graphic design, film and photography, and any kind of art really that you could possibly imagine. I have tried a bunch of what Skillshare has to offer over the course of the time that I've been on the platform, but one thing that I'm continuing to try to get better at right now is photography, and especially figuring out what exactly to do with my photos once they're off my camera. Lightroom and things like Lightroom are scary and confusing places for the uninitiated, and I'm trying to initiate myself. So I have been working through classes like this one and using the techniques on my own photos to practice in Lightroom. Just like messing around with them, even though I know that they're not going anywhere, which I honestly think is the best way to practice anything creative. Not everything in life has to have stakes. Sometimes you can just pick up a hobby and try to get better at it because it's something that you want to do. It's something that you want to be good at for yourself. And no matter what those things might be for you, Skillshare is a really great place to go if you want to challenge yourself to consistently make time for the things that you love. And if any of this sounds like it might be applicable to you, if it sounds like something you might like, I would strongly recommend checking out Skillshare. And you can give it a try by clicking the link in my description to get your first month completely for free to see if it's for you, and then a 20% discount. Thank you so much to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. I really appreciate it. You guys rock. Okay, let's get back to it. Okay, welcome back. You've made it. Now it's time for the actual video. We're probably, I'm just warning you in advance, going to have to transition to evening lighting, considering the fact that it's 4 p.m. and the sun is already on a swift departure from the sky. You really don't know what you have until daylight savings time takes it from you, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. The first book that I read took me a long time to read, but it was technically the first thing that I picked up back at the start of September, even though I only finished it in mid-October. So it's where we're starting this wrap up, and that would be with the widely beloved Magnolia Parks. Look, I am just going to say right now that I see people talk about this series online with like religious levels of significance sometimes. So if that's you, I would recommend skipping to the next book. It's for your own good, okay? I don't want you to hate me or God forbid yourself just because you like something in this dark, soulless void of a world. But what is this wonderful book about other than nothing? This is about a girl named Magnolia Parks, the titular character. Magnolia's main personality traits are being rich, selfish, and insufferable. And these are the same main personality traits that everybody else in the entire supporting cast of this world, except for one, arguably 2 people, also have, which would make them borderline indistinguishable from each other, except for the fact that you do spend most of this book inside of Magnolia's head, which means, for better or for worse, she is slightly distinguished from the rest of her dysfunctional friend group. Other than being rich and the worst, or possibly because she is rich and the worst, Magnolia's internal monologue also has this really cool quality to it, it, where every other paragraph she feels compelled to remind you of the various designer brands that either she, her ex-boyfriend, or any of the people in the supporting cast is wearing at any given time. And that is not an exaggeration, by the way. I think that maybe Jessa Hastings, the author, thought that this would be like a cool, fun, posh thing for her to do, but I thought it to be something of my own personal hell trying to wade through this fucking gigantic book, by the way. It's so long for no reason. More on that soon, but some quotes to demonstrate what I'm saying about Magnolia's internal monologue. God, there really are so many that I could choose from. Here we go. This one's great. I feel glad that I'm wearing the Noel Martine lace-trimmed satin pajamas from Morgan Lane plus Love Shack Fancy collab because it's very short and it shows my midriff, which is terribly toned right now, and I hope he thinks about me without my clothes, and I think he must because he presses his hand into his mouth and swallows. Or, alternatively, he looks so good. I don't know why he looks so good. All he's in is the black MX1 skinny fit distressed leather paneled stretch denim jeans from Amiri, black logo print loop back cotton jersey sweatshirt from Givenchy, and black Vans. Bit of a nothing outfit, really, but still, my heart goes funny. Did they hurt you? I blink up at Christian. His eyes flicker down my knitted, candy pink, hooded, pom-pom embellished mini dress from Gucci before he shakes his head. It's like a rich, posh, high society version of Ebony Darkness Dementia Raven Away. I don't know how you're expected to take any of that seriously. Anyways, moving on and back to what this book is actually about. Our main character, Magnolia, has no job, no aims, dreams, or ambitions, really, other than continuing to be rich and stylish. It seems to be the only thing that she wants for herself individually. And considering the fact that she also seems to be a pretty fucking horrible friend, the only thing that she has going on in her entire life are her romantic relationships, namely this torrid emotional affair that has persisted through multiple of Magnolia's new relationships between her and her first love, her ex-boyfriend, whose name is Baxter James Ballantyne. Worse, he goes by BJ for short. Worse than that, Magnolia calls him Beej. Just pew, 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 throwing these revelations about this book at you like punches. BJ is the other main perspective character inside of this book. You get to spend a lot of really lovely time with him as well. And their lore together is that they had dated for like 4 or 5 years or something until BJ cheated on Magnolia with somebody else like 2 years before the start of this book, and they broke up. And ever since then, they've continued to orbit around each other in this way that the book clearly wants you to believe is like super romantic in a kind of toxic, taboo way. But for me, I just felt like it was kind of pathetic. Basically, the situation at the start of this book is they're best friends. They clearly still have unresolved feelings for each other. BJ does this really cool thing where he has copious amounts of one-night stands, and then he goes and tells Magnolia about it. And then Magnolia is like, I don't want to hear about it, and she storms off and she's upset, and then she starts dating somebody else to like get back at him for sleeping with other people, and that feeds into the cycle, right? Because then BJ is really jealous of this other guy that she's dating, so he's like, I'm gonna go get back at her by having another one-night stand. That'll show her. And the most pointless Ouroboros that you have ever seen in your entire life just continues spiraling just like that. And all the while, again, they're continuing to have this constant torrid emotional affair where even though they're not hooking up, they're not macking, they're like cuddling and sleeping in the same bed every single night. And BJ still has a drawer at Magnolia's house, and sometimes she wears his clothes and like thinks of him. And instead of properly talking about their feelings, they instead message each other cryptic bullshit about how the metaphorical weather is doing inside of their lives, with the weather being their feelings on the relationship between the two of them. So BJ will be like, how's the weather over there, Magnolia? And Magnolia will be like, clear skies. And that means that she does not hate him currently. That's what they do. That's how they cope with this mess that they've created. If you couldn't already tell based on how I'm talking about it, I feel like this book was made in a lab to piss me off. At the very beginning, when I first started it, I actually thought it was kind of funny because you get these ridiculous quotes like this. He shrugs indifferently. He being BJ Ballantyne, my first everything, really. Love, time, heartbreak. He's the boy with the golden hair and the golden eyes, even though his hair is brown and his eyes are green. The most beautiful boy in all of London, they say. And probably I agree, on his good days. But why am I explaining him to you? You already know who he is. Or like this one, also from the beginning. Black denim jacket, black t-shirt, black jeans, black cons, but he's very shiny on the inside though, precarious nature of his job aside. His hair could be blonde, but I think it's brown. And his eyes could be green, but I think they're maybe a brown or a hazel. Like, does this girl have fucking face blindness, dude? Why does she describe everybody in a way that is completely fucking indecipherable? And just reading it at the beginning, I was like, okay, this might not be peak literature, but this could be bad in a way that's really funny. It's like the same impulse that drives people to like trashy comedies or reality TV. That's how I feel a lot of the time reading books that are written like that. It's so silly that it ends up being a fun time for me anyways. But the further that I got with this, and it didn't take very long for my feelings to change, the further I got, the more that optimism was just sapped out of me, because this book is just so fucking boring. Let me turn on the light for this. Let me save you. Mild Magnolia Parks, spoiler alert, as I talk about the plot generally speaking, but I read it on my Kobo, which in retrospect was probably a mistake because I felt like I was in fucking stasis the entire time, seeing zero physical progress. According to Google, the physical book is like 500 pages, which is so long considering the fact that I've already told you basically the entire plot of the book. And I'm sure that fans of this book would argue with me on the nitty-gritty of this. Okay, this is just my opinion, but nothing fucking happens the entire time. Nobody changes, nobody gets better. Arguably, everybody gets worse, to the point where I wanted them to be together, not because it would make me happy, but because it would make them, the characters, absolutely fucking miserable. That's how much hatred I had in my heart for the cast of this book by the end. I don't know how to capture for you how absolutely cooked the reading experience of this story is, because the few things of substance that kind of happen in this book, a new character, a new plot point, maybe a new thought that Magnolia and BJ are having about this situation, it fries me, because you get to the end of the book and it's like, psych, all of the things that barely matter to begin with, to be fair, inside of the story, because nothing fucking happens the whole time, but all of the things that you thought maybe would kind of matter a little bit, right? Just kidding. Wouldn't it be crazy if we just ended this book exactly in the same place as where we began, with the exact same relationship status between the characters and the exact same emotions going through their heads? And wouldn't it be crazy if we just had absolutely zero character development at all to justify reading any of these 500 pages, and the only thing that you get by getting to the end of this book is a twist that's revealed that doesn't even fucking matter to you, because you could care less about any of the people inside of this story and it changes nothing about the circumstances of the situation? Wouldn't that be wild? This is the kind of book that genuinely makes me question whether or not I enjoy reading. That's why it took so long to get through. I had to read like several other things in the span of finishing this book in order to properly motivate myself to pick up my e-reader. That is not normal to me. Usually how I read is I go really, really hard and I read a book in like 2 days and then I take a 2-day break to process. That's kind of how it goes for me. It's not normal for me to feel like I'm fighting for my life to get through 20 pages of something before I quit for the day. Like that is not how I usually read. I gave this 1 star. Again, I do feel like it was made in a lab specifically to piss me off. It's basically everything that I hate inside of one book. And despite that, I still thought about giving it 1.5 stars, just because sometimes with the bottom of the barrel ratings, I'm trying to get better about this so I can be like a more trustworthy source or whatever, but I start to feel kind of bad. Even if I don't really think there are any redeeming qualities to be seen, this book didn't like offend me beyond feeling like an offensive use of my time. So I thought about giving it 1.5 just for like, I don't know, trying or something. But then a bunch of new drama came out about the author, who already was not a squeaky clean figure, by the way. Like, at best, I feel like Jessa Hastings was a suspicious presence on Instagram. But yeah, new controversy dropped, and I thought to myself, you know what? I don't think she needs the extra half star just because this book didn't like burn down my house and kill my whole family. It can just be bad, in my opinion, and that can be enough to give it 1 star. So yeah, that's what it's getting. Believe it or not, I do have the ammunition to keep going. I definitely will have more to say about this book during my worst books list this year. Spoilers that this will be on there. But since the video is like kind of soon in the future, I don't want to like use up all of my jokes and opinions now. So I'm gonna can it here, but yeah, don't waste your time with this. In my opinion, I'm just one girl. Okay, anything remotely compelling about this book is replicated in so much other published work. And also, dare I say, in fanfic for free with characters that you already like. Okay, I took a couple of like deep centering breaths and I moved the lamp. So hopefully this is slightly better lighting for you. Complete tonal shift with this one. This is another book that I read piecemeal over the course of September, but for different reasons. I mean, this one's like actually good. This is Thick by Tracy McMillan Cottom, and both of these so far were off of my most recent TBR, which I'm kind of trying to zoot through so that way we can do another one on time this time at the beginning of December. But this is an essay collection, so it's nonfiction, and it's kind of hard to talk about as a singular work since all of the essays inside of it are about different things. But I would say that, to generalize, this is a book that is informed by the author's experiences, both as an academic full-time and then also as a journalist, as well as her experiences living as a Black woman in America at various points of time in her life. And it's got a lot of like social commentary and cultural criticism on things like beauty standards and class divisions on campus at private universities, even within marginalized groups, rape culture and how the author has experienced that because of the different intersections of her identities, stuff like that. It's a bunch of different things that are under a general umbrella that has that vibe. But even though I still tend to find them pretty difficult to review, I like essay collections a lot. I used to read a lot more of them in college than I do now, just because when I was really busy with classes and clubs, essay collections and also short story collections are so easy to fit into your life, because you pick up a book like this when you have like 25, 30 minutes and you can just crank through an entire essay, and then you have something to chew on when you're doing other things or you're commuting or whatever. I've always felt that that is the best way to read an essay collection. They're not things that I think are best binged. I thought that overall this was really good. I gave it 4 stars. I would say that this has this Atlantic article kind of vibe to it. It's accessible. The narrative voice is clear and sharp and oftentimes pretty funny in a way that I think a lot of people really love in nonfiction. Even though this author is a professor, like her main job is being an academic, it never feels like she's writing over your head. Like you always know exactly what she's talking about, exactly what point she's trying to make, and that is a direct result of the way that this book is written. But the essay collections that I tend to really love, that really tend to stick with me, are collections that are a little bit more like Girlhood is what comes to mind, where they're less journalistic and they're a bit more literary. There are more qualities of fiction writing with things like extended metaphors, really rich imagery and prose baked into true stories and explorations of like actual phenomena in the world. Those are always my absolute favorite essay collections. So that's why this didn't like knock it out of the park for me, even though I do still think it was really, really good. But again, if you want something that you can just pick up and put down and then think about for the rest of the day whenever you have that spare half hour, this is the kind of book that is wonderful for that. Would strongly recommend if you don't already like read a lot of journalism, read a lot of articles in your spare time. Stuff like this is a really good way to scratch that itch and to still feel like connected to the world around you. Okay, next up after that, I started the September buddy read that was on my Patreon, which was Barrier Bones in the Midnight Soil. I happen to have this gorgeous special edition that is completely wasted on me. I'll probably regift it to one of my friends because I gave this book 2 stars. My educated guess is that within my audience, I think this is going to be my most unpopular opinion in this video. So I'll try to explain it to you. I mean, it's been a month and a half and I'm still kind of bitter about it. So I do remember exactly where we went wrong. Back when it came out, I was told that the elevator pitch for this book was toxic lesbian vampires through the ages, which to me sounded like a grand old time. And that pitch is not wrong. I think that's actually a pretty fair picture of a lot of what this book is. But just like so many of my experiences with V.E. Schwab, outside of Vicious and Vicious alone, I felt like reading this book, it sets itself up for such a home run with the premise and the first section of the story. And then it strikes out repeatedly in the second half up until the end, which was a fumble unlike anything that I think I've seen this year. And that fumble ends up feeling especially bad when, if you're like me, I got my hopes up so high at the start of this book that I would really enjoy it. So it's falling so much further than if I'd never gotten my hopes up at all, if you know what I'm saying. But let me give you a little bit more detail on what this is about. This book follows a few different women through a few different eras who end up all becoming vampires and getting mixed up into each other's lives throughout the generations. They are toxic, that is true for sure. And thematically, the story is interested in engaging with things like what it means to be hungry, especially as a woman and as a queer person living throughout different eras in history where your freedom was not always guaranteed. It's about sacrifices that you make, both within yourself and also external to you, in order to fulfill that hunger, whether literally or metaphorically. It's about necessary and unnecessary violence and necessary and unnecessary retribution. And it's also about sadness and longing and grief and how a person can be hollowed out from the inside. If you can't tell, there's a lot going on. And at the beginning, in maybe the first entire half of this book, I really did feel like even though it's slow, it's atmospheric, it's gothic in terms of vibe, which I think maybe some people who are not me could also have problems with if they didn't like this book, I actually enjoyed that. I liked the patient way that I felt this book was teeing up all of the different themes that it wanted to explore, and I was super interested in seeing where everything would go. I think that the only real sin in the first half of this book was that the book is multiple POV. It's told through 3 primary perspectives, and chapters would end and the perspective would often change in the middle of things happening. But that level of intrigue, the level of action, was not the same across all of the perspectives. So almost always, depending on what was happening, I felt like I was 10 times more invested in one of the stories. And for me, the way I would cope with this is the perspective would change and then I would skip ahead to see how many pages stood between me and getting back to whatever was happening in the story that I was interested in, which is just not a good sign that a book has proper pacing and immersion, in my opinion. But in the first half, these thoughts were not fully formed because again, I was still like really optimistic about where the book would go. I was down, I was having a good time, and I was especially into the super past timeline. I found that one to be by far the most interesting. interesting. I think that that character is by far the most complicated and morally gray, honestly morally black, but just in such a neat way during the first half of this book. I love reading about evil women that feel like genuinely really complicated. The writing was also good. I feel like it was appropriately lush. I liked the dialogue. I never have problems with V.E. Schwab's writing, really. Basically, what I'm trying to say is I was really locked in. I was having a good time with this up until there's a big shift in how the story is presented to you in the second half of this book. If you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. And initially, before I knew also that that would just be how the story was now, I thought it was fun. I thought it was interesting, but the further I got and the more that I started to feel like this book was just careening away from reasonability and consistency, even within its own like vampire universe, just with how the characters are presented to us, the more that I started to get this really awful sinking feeling in my stomach that the ending would be bad. And then the ending was bad. The ending was so bad, actually, that I knocked off like a full 1.5 stars off of how I was feeling around 70% of the way through, even with like some of the trajectories not being what I was hoping for. I probably still would have given this like 3.5 stars, but the ending was just, it was so bad in my opinion. It was cartoonish. It was so convenient. It was entirely simplistic. And it was a complete betrayal of, I think, all but maybe arguably one of the main character arcs in the story. And I would argue that even that arc would have been better with an ending that felt like 100 times more earned than the ending that we got. But worst of all, to me, without spoiling anything, I really felt like I understood, at least my read of what this book was trying to build up to thematically, up until the last 20% of the story. When things started happening that felt completely counterproductive to the established themes of the book, as soon as I started thinking about them for longer than 2 seconds, to the point where the ending of this book, the like Occam's razor reading that I had when I was going through it, was like an actively evil take that just, it can't have been what the author meant, because I know that she's cool, but I was just so annoyed with the decision to take those characters where they took them in this book. I don't know, again, I think that this is going to be a pretty unpopular opinion within my community, because I know that there are ways to interpret that ending more favorably, right? And people who went through this book, I think maybe with a slightly different thematic reading to me, still got a lot out of it. They still really enjoyed it. Or even if they didn't like the ending, they still connected with the book overall. The journey was still worth it for them. But for me, the ending just muddled the narrative entirely and stripped away basically all of the meaning that the story had for me up to that point. And it replaced it with like, ooh, so crazy, didn't expect that level drama. And also the most ham-fisted and predictable emotional conclusion to a character story that I've ever seen, while betraying all of the other characters in the story and their entire arcs and the way that they'd been established before all of them were just reduced down by the narrative to their most base traits. But yeah, if you've read the book, hopefully that makes sense. Sometimes it can be hard for me to review things like this spoiler-free when they really only dropped the ball in the back half, but hopefully you kind of understand what I'm trying to say. Again, I do think that with a story like this one, you can take a lot of different things out of it from what I did. So if this still interests you, if the premise still sounds like something that you might like, and if you really tend to enjoy, again, gothic, lush prose, or if you're already a V.E. Schwab fan and you're okay with a story that is a little bit slow, it's a bit meandering, the pacing is not always consistent, and you enjoy characters that are not always likable, this book definitely still has an audience. I would still recommend it to the right kind of reader. Unfortunately, the right kind of reader is just not me. Okay, after that, Jesus, When the Moon Hatched, what is there to say about this book that I have not already shared with you? I'm not gonna go too in depth on this because I do have a full video about it, but if you haven't watched that video because you're worried about spoilers, this is my spoiler-free review to help you decide whether or not you would like to spend between 10 and 14 hours with this rectangular prism. This book is about a girl named Rave, spelled like this, and she is short, she is tiny, but she has striking eyes and raven hair and a dagger that can cut through anything. And Rave is an assassin for this underground rebel group that is trying to dethrone the 3 sons of this original, now deceased, super despotic ruler. Now, why exactly was he a despot? Great question. You don't really know. You know that he's bad and that we need to dethrone his spawn at any cost. Okay? Rave is also an airbender in a world where long ago the 4 nations lived in harmony, except that long ago there was also a 5th element named Ether that was sealed away after he caused this massive problem. The lore in this book is actually quite complex, but it doesn't really matter for the summary. The point is, Rave is like a musical airbender in this world where she's airbending basically through song. And for reasons, while doing rebel things, she ends up getting caught and imprisoned by this like really ugly evil man whose finger she bites off during the fight to capture her. And while she is in jail, she ends up running into this mysterious, sexy man who is also absolutely fucking gigantic. Like, seriously, he is the biggest man that you have ever seen in your entire life. His name is Khan, and Khan seems to know a lot about Rave, even though she doesn't remember them ever meeting. How convenient that Rave just so happens to be missing a chunk of her memories. I wonder what the deal with that could be. And yeah, I mean, obviously they have to get her out of jail, and then they go on to deal with all of the various beefs that are happening inside of the kingdom, while also falling in love and trying to resist the urge to smash in every single novel location that they end up in. And that is the very, very basic, bare bones description of what this is about. There's more to the story than that, obviously, but nothing that's easily digestible, so that's what you're going to get. I gave this book 2 stars, almost entirely because of the writing. I actually thought that the story overall had some really poignant character moments and a really interesting foundation for a world and for a magic system that, the way I described it earlier, makes it sound really derivative. And yeah, I mean, it is a little bit derivative. It's elemental magic, but it's tied into like religion and authority and the world building overall of the story in a really neat way, at least in concept. I'm not actually sure that in practice you really see the depth that I'm describing, but the bones are there from like the start of the story. It's pretty interesting. But the writing, the prose in this book was just, it was not for me. I mean, this isn't to say, by the way, that all indie or self-published books can't be good, can't have good writing, can't feel well edited and tight. That would be the least charitable way to understand what I'm about to say, and it's not what I believe at all. I'm just saying that this book is very representative, in my opinion, of this exact brand of specifically these massively popular TikTok romantasy novels that blow the fuck up, end up getting a traditional publishing deal, but at that point the book is already out. They're mostly just re-releasing the original indie published thing, and that exact genre of book, more often than not, in my experience, is just so long for no reason. They're almost always above 600 pages. They're overwritten, but not in a way that is charming or particularly competent. It's just fucking long and dense with completely meaningless, repetitive imagery. And if you want to know what I mean, I read like a million quotes from this book in that video, and I think that even if you don't know what I mean the first time, by like quote 15, you get what I'm going for. You get like a fraction of the actual experience of forcing yourself through this book, because just for me personally, for my tastes, this is the kind of book that desperately needed a level of ruthlessness from a good editor that I don't think it had. And you can see this too in some of the twists and plot decisions inside of this book, which I felt overwhelmingly were pretty predictable, but they wouldn't have necessarily felt that way without the endless repetitive foreshadowing that the author is doing, because it's a kind of book where I don't really think that she trusted her readers to ever follow what was going on, partially for an actual reason, as evidenced by the super long glossary at the start of the book that I guess the author expected you to read before you started the story, because it really felt like to understand what was going on, you were expected to constantly be referring to the terms in this glossary in lieu of the story helping you understand what they mean through like properly defining its terms in its world, which is just super lazy fantasy writing in my opinion. I actually like a glossary, especially for a longer series, but I do not like glossary in lieu of good writing. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't all bad. I don't think I've mentioned this, but I did like the guy, Khan. I thought he was pretty good. Even though he is ultimately pretty simplistic in the story, he's also pretty likable. And I mean, he's not borderline abusive to the main character, which it's a low bar, but you know, he clears it. If this book was tighter, if it was written in a style that I liked more, I honestly might have given it like 3.5 stars. And it's not reinventing the wheel, okay? You can definitely see some plot conveniences and holes if you start thinking about especially the middle portion of the story. And it also does a thing that books in series do sometimes that I really tend to hate, where you read the entire story and you don't get even like a minor payoff on some of the conflicts at the end. It's all saved for future books. That really annoys me, usually. I feel like you can always come up with more conflicts. You should reward a reader in some capacity for getting to the end of a book with something that is satisfying. I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but it's how I feel. But yeah, the bones for this were fine. It was the muscles and the tendons and the skin. It was everything around the bones that was less fine, in my opinion. After that, we've done it. We've purged almost all of the books I did not like. After that, I finally picked up Jade Legacy, which is the 3rd book in the Green Bone saga, which starts with Jade City. I am, to my core, a mood reader, especially for books I think I'm really going to like. I will wait to be in the exact right headspace where I'm craving exactly what I hope that book is going to provide, because I feel like finding a new favorite book or finishing one of your favorite series, it can be such a special experience that I'm really superstitious sometimes, and that's why it took me so long to get to this. It's because I really liked the first 2 books and I was thrilled to see where the series would go, but I knew that I wanted to have a lot of time and a lot of like free mental load to be able to enjoy it as much as I possibly could. And I mean, I don't really know if I would recommend my strategy, considering the fact that I waited long enough where I ended up feeling like I had to watch 2 recap videos per book for the first 2 books in the series just to make sure that I didn't go in having forgotten anything that would be important. I just kind of sat there for 2 hours doing puzzles on my phone while listening to a bunch of recaps on 2x. But by the time I got through them, I really felt prepared. So I was super pumped to dive back into this. And it is quite long. It's like 700 pages. So it ended up still taking me a week and a half to get through because I read a bunch of it the first couple of days and ended up getting kind of busy and returned to it. But that was okay. I still liked it. I still was thinking about it constantly when I was not reading it, and I still ended up giving it 4.5 stars. And I'm going to talk about this series as a whole pretty generally because this is, of course, the last book in a trilogy. Giving anything away about the setup for this book in particular would be spoiling the series, which I don't want to do since I think anybody who is watching this video with a similar taste to me will probably really enjoy this ride. But the series in general follows the Call family, who are the leaders of one of the 2 major clans that exist on this island country that's called Kekon. And you can think of the clans sort of like a more honorable version of mafia-style organized crime. That is a little bit reductive, but I mean, the way that this book was pitched to me successfully was somebody telling me that it was like a magical martial arts East Asian version of The Godfather, and I was like, yeah, that sounds sick. So I do think it's a useful lens. But these 2 clans are super powerful on this island because they control the vast majority of the island's supply of jade, which is, in this kind of urban fantasy world, a resource that when it's used either by Kekanese people or by non-Kekanese people who take a drug that lets them use it, it gives the person who is wielding the jade the ability to use what you can think of as basic physical superpowers that mostly serve to just make people do martial arts really well. That's kind of the vibe. It's functionally giving them this wellspring of energy that they can draw from to go really fast, to deflect bullets with like swipes of energy away from them, to channel that energy into a weapon, either their hands or an actual weapon that they're wielding, that will then put an inordinate amount of power into the strike. But you can also use the energy to steel yourself against attacks like that by making like a barrier within your body. And there are definitely other uses for jade as well that you kind of see throughout the series, but mostly when it's relevant, it's being used for combat, or people want it to use it for combat, because Kekon is the only natural source for jade in the entire world. So even though it's a really small country, it's super important geopolitically because obviously all of the other much larger countries want jade. Giving jade to soldiers feels like the future. Everybody wants to have stronger soldiers to fight all of their stupid fucking wars. And the modern clans, at their core historically, they were formed to protect Kekon and its resources from colonial threats. That was like the main thing that they were trying to do. But at the start of the series, nowadays, the clans are also enemies of each other. They have different ideas about how they want to establish Kekon on the international stage. They have different ideas about how they want to handle affairs domestically. And the main characters that you're following throughout this series are this generation of 4 siblings. We're all children of the most recent pillar, the most recent leader of the clan. And they've spent their entire lives basically in this perpetual street war for influence with the other large clan, with the Mountain Clan. And from the beginning of the series, you're seeing how they're balancing that and how they're trying to pull strings politically for their clan, how they're trying to get an edge on the mountain while still also remaining vigilant against international threats. But despite everything I'm saying, and despite what you might expect, the series at its core is overwhelmingly about the relationships between these siblings, between this entire like larger extended family, and just all of the other really important people in this main cast of 4's lives as they grow and they change throughout the course of many years. I mean, this is a long story. Lots of time passes when you're reading the series within the world. And everything I described to you about the political premise of this book, that's just the foundation. That's like the battleground for all of these relationships to grow and change. Of the fantasy series that I've really enjoyed, I do think that this is the most dense with politics and with like machinations and negotiation. So much of these books are just characters talking shop with each other about how to handle all of the various threats that are affecting the clan. And I found that really interesting. I think that the politics in this series are pretty great, but I still want to double down on the fact that that's not the story. The story is these people. It's their relationships. It's how their ideologies grow and change over time. It's a story about loyalty and betrayal and family. And the politics are like the vessel for that. And it's a great vessel. They're really interesting, but I don't want that to intimidate anybody who's interested in this series. Because I feel like rather than just whether or not you like high politic fantasy novels, a better predictor of whether or not this book is for you is if you like something that is a slow burn. There is definitely action, but this is consistent for the entire series. In each book, you're really just building up the entire time into between like 2 and 4 major action scenes that happen, and then they serve as these massive turning points inside of the story. And those action scenes are fucking cool. They're well written, they're super tense, they're well choreographed. Fonda Lee really excels at describing all of the different gravities that intersect during combat. Like, it's so easy to visualize what's happening. But as good as those scenes are, they're not the bulk of the story. And they're also better because of all of the things that build up to them every single time. I mean, the series, while you're reading it, feels like a perpetual slow burn. And if that's something that you know will bother you, there's nothing that I can say to convince you to make this book into something that you'll like. It's not for you. But if you are up for a series that requires a little bit of patience, if you're okay with something that's a bit slower paced, those payoffs are always worth it. They are always so good. And I said this, I remember when I reviewed the first book back at like the beginning of this year, but it stayed true. The series really reminds me of an urban fantasy version of Succession, except the main difference, honestly, between this and Succession is the Culls are overwhelmingly more likable characters, in my opinion. Even though, I mean, that's not always true. Like, they make mistakes. Sometimes they do bad things on purpose, not as a mistake. Hilo, especially in this series, I think is the character that will stick with me the most. He's such a memorable and infuriatingly complex character, where half the time he's being cruel or unreasonable or selfish and you just kind of want to beat his ass, but the other half of the time you kind of just have to sit there with like wide-eyed admiration at his ingenuity and at everything he's tried to do for the people that he loves. But even apart from Hilo, all of the main characters, in my opinion, are remarkably well drawn. Lots of the side characters too. I mean, the series is really long. It's probably a combined 1,700 pages, something like that. And that's a lot of time. So you get to see some side character arcs that are like heartbreakingly well done. The only reason why I didn't give this book 5 stars, I mean, it's pretty close. It's only half a star off. So this wasn't that big of a deal to me, but this book does oftentimes feel quite long. And I think that you can be this long and not feel long the way that this book does sometimes. And there were just a couple of decisions made with the pacing of this book and the way that time jumps would happen that just had me wishing that we were taking more time with some parts of the story and less time with other parts of the story. It wasn't perfectly balanced, I don't think. When you say that a book is long, it's almost meaningless. I feel like a book can feel long in a million different ways, but that's how this felt long to me. There were just a few scenes where I felt like we got too much, especially in comparison to moments that weren't quite enough. But the ending sequence of this book is fantastic. It was so good. I didn't expect this to make me cry, considering the fact that I made it to like the 90% mark without crying, which involved some tragedy. There were some bad things happening before that point. But dude, it got me. I don't know what else to say. It was the blueprint for how to end a series in a way that leaves you feeling completely full. Like, you end up wanting more a little bit because the food was really good, but you also know that you were served exactly enough. That is almost an impossible balance to strike in a book like this with so many loose ends. But I think this series does it exceptionally well. It's probably like top 2 or 3 fantasy endings I think I've read. Fantastic series overall. I really liked it, even though it took me a little while to finally get to the last book. We got there, okay? We've done it. Okay, after that, another pretty big tonal shift. I picked up Not in Love by Ali Hazelwood. If you're new to my channel, I really like Ali Hazelwood, but I went into this one kind of cautiously because I remembered hearing a lot of mixed reviews back when it came out. And I have to say, the problems I had when I was reading this book were not the same problems I remembered people talking about when this book came out. I gave this 3 stars and it's a mixed 3-star. This isn't like an average forgettable 3-star. I had pretty strong positive and negative opinions when I was reading this. The premise of this is you are following a girl named Rue, who is a chemical engineer that's working in food preservation technology at a company. And her life is suddenly on the verge of being turned upside down because this private equity firm has just bought the debt of the company that she works for. And the people representing this firm have made it pretty clear during this entire process that they intend to do a hostile takeover and take control over not just the company, but also all of the company's assets, which honestly sounds more boring than it is. I was a little bit worried about the premise of this going in, just because like that's not the most thrilling B plot, right? But it's more of a soft relationships-based thing, because the reason that this matters to Rue is not because she's scared that the company is going to like fire her or something once it's under new ownership. It's because Rue's boss is one of the only 2 close friends that Rue has, and the collateral for the loan that this company just bought is a patent that she had previously fought like tooth and nail to keep in her name. So Rue is really worried for her friend that she's just going to lose her life's work, basically. And she would hate this company in peace, except for the fact that one of the partners for this firm ends up being this guy that Rue had met up with for a one-night stand. And they didn't even end up one-night standing because of this situation that randomly popped up and interrupted them. But Rue has never in her life done anything other than one-night stands. She doesn't do dating, she doesn't do repeat visits, but just something about this guy when she met him led her to give him her number, which she she's never done before, and before all of this nonsense started happening, she really wanted to see him again. So pretty unfortunate that he ends up rocking up, ready to steal away the company, and because of all of this, Rue feels like she kind of has to start hating him, even though he's still really nice, even though they still feel this really strong pull and connection towards each other. So that's the basic premise. The only other thing I would say is important to know about this book is that it's very much like a sex first, feelings later kind of romance novel. They can't date, obviously, because it would be such a betrayal, but what if they banged once and they got it out of their system, as they say, and then nobody found out, and then, I don't know, maybe Rue will be over him or something. You know, that's kind of the idea, that's the cope that the characters are running with. But I feel like it's important to understand for your preferences that that is the route that the relationship is taking when it comes to development. In the negative reviews that I remember when this book came out, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but like this is the thought that I went into this story with. People hated Rue. I remember reading a lot of that back when this book came out, and I actually really liked both main characters in this book, both Rue and also Eli, which is the guy's name. Rue is one of those characters to me where I can see why people hate her, but also it does feel a little bit like a personal attack against me. I don't know if any of you guys have ever had that experience with a character, but I found her to be unexpectedly pretty relatable as somebody who also really did not have very many friends growing up, who also preferred to just isolate myself rather than risk trusting new people to actually like me and not find me as underwhelming and annoying as I oftentimes felt when I was growing up. I remember being so sure that people would just start hating me as soon as they got to know enough about me, and that's not a feeling that went away, honestly, until I was in college. And I still feel that way sometimes when I get in my head and I want to hate myself for a little bit. Like, I haven't outgrown my personality, which is the reason why I felt that way in the first place, you know what I mean? But as a result, as somebody who is also kind of like cold and aloof and uncomfortable when I don't know what's going on, it's nice to see a character like that who also still has a personality, right? That is an issue that you can get when you're trying to come up with a character like Rue. You just end up with somebody who's not like other girls, and their personality is like they don't fit in because they're weird, and they're weird because they don't fit in. But Rue, in my opinion, was a complete character, and I could always see what was compelling and funny and neat about her, and what Eli saw in her pretty much instantly that first night that they met. I don't really think that this book is particularly insta-lovey. That's another critique that I saw about this. And in my opinion, synthesizing everything I've seen about this book online, I think that critique probably mostly exists because there's a lot of smut in this. And also because from day one, they know they like each other. They know that they want to see each other again. But like, sometimes you do hit it off with somebody that you're super compatible with on your first date. I feel like that's a pretty normal place to meet somebody that you already previously thought was hot enough to swipe right on. You know what I mean? Like, it's not weird to feel a connection with somebody that you meet for the first time on a date. And a lot of time is also passing inside of this book before emotionally their connection is strong enough to justify what ends up happening. I don't know, maybe the pacing of this book doesn't always make it feel that way because there are a lot of like time skips built in. There's a lot of like a couple of weeks passed between A and B, and you get a little bit lost in the sauce, which I guess could maybe contribute to why somebody would feel like this didn't have enough development inside of it. But for me, what I mean when I say that I don't like insta-love is I don't like it when characters are instantly in love with people they have no reason to even like, where there's not even chemistry, but for some reason you're like obsessed with them. That is unrealistic to me. Insta-love to me, when you're using it in a derogatory way, it's a band-aid that you're putting over a couple that doesn't make sense. And the reason why this wasn't insta-love to me is because I feel like they made sense the entire time. Like, from the very first night that they met, I understood why they had such good banter, why they had such a nice connection, and I could see why that would evolve in the way that it does, right? It's like you see so many married people talk about how, oh, from my second date with my partner, like I knew they were the one. And sure, sometimes maybe that's cope, that's like retrospective, oh, but of course, because it's like results-based thinking. But also I think that that can be real for people. It's not like that insane, especially in this context. But yeah, I liked Rue. I also thought that Eli was really good. Unlike Lucas, my other most recent Ali Hazelwood man, who was predominantly tall and Swedish as his main personality traits, Eli is tall, but he's also hardworking and self-sacrificing, sometimes to a fault. And he carries around a lot of really deep regrets and resentment, despite the fact that he's built a life that he loves. I feel like, honestly, he's a better than average Ali Hazelwood man in terms of having real concrete personality traits. You really get to know who he is in a way that made it super easy to root for him and Rue as a couple. So with all of that said, you're probably wondering why I only gave this 3 stars, which maybe is my least favorite Ali Hazelwood book. I gave Deep End something in a similar range, but the reason for this book is I liked it a lot in theory, but In practice, the actual book was really fucking boring to me, to be honest with you. Mostly because the main conflict of this whole story, the hostile takeover of this company, I don't know if it was just me, but I predicted the main thing that would happen inside of this book on like page 35, which would be fine, okay? Like, I don't need to always be surprised to still like the direction that a story takes, except for the fact that the way this book draws out the main plot is over and over and over again. When character A is right on the verge of telling character B something that's super duper important, it could change everything, they just get fucking interrupted, like literally interrupted mid-conversation by somebody or something that's happening. And that happens like 3 or 4 different times inside of this book, which was so infuriating to me. It felt so drawn out in the most annoying possible way, because again, I predicted this main plot point early, but I think it would honestly be pretty impossible not to have predicted it by about halfway through the book. And still, at that point and afterwards, it keeps getting drawn out over and over and over again, to the point where you're not even really satisfied watching all of the characters navigate this eventual ending once they do finally reach it, once they do finally have these conversations, because it was so drawn out that you stopped giving a fuck like 200 pages ago. And that's really all that was happening in terms of main external to these two characters plot. And so there's a significant part of this book where it's just like, let's almost talk about this really important thing. Oops, I guess we can't. Oh well, we'll just have another smut scene. Repeat that 5 times, start the end sequence, roll credits. The book is over. On that note, I've talked about this a bit before. I'm not like a prude, but I get bored most of the time, unless the writing is something else. 5 smut scenes is just, it's too much for me. I'm a 1 or 2 kind of girl, and I need a lot of slow burn in order for them to hit at all. But that's preferential. I mean, if you do want to read an Ali Hazelwood book that has a lot more smut than the rest of her catalog, this is pretty steamy. It's definitely more similar to Deep End than it is to the rest of her books. There is a lot of just smashing and not talking about their feelings going on inside of this, in a way that in a smaller dose I think could have been really compelling, because again, I like Rue. I understand why she's moving in this situation the way that she is, but I was just so bored to tears by the end of this book that I didn't even really give a fuck about seeing it through. That's what I mean when I said that I liked this story a lot in theory, but not so much in practice. After that, I picked up Masters of Death by Olive E. Blake. If I were to graph my enjoyment of this book, let me draw it for you. The graph would look like this. Love, neutral, hate. At the beginning of this book, Olive E. Blake has a particular writing style that is just, it's so specific to her. Both fans and haters will understand what I mean. And this is, I think, the 3rd Olive E. Blake book that I've read, but it takes me a little while every time to get used to the fact that I will be reading shit like epiphanically inside of a sentence, like epiphany, but you make it into an adverb for no reason. And sometimes she cooks, okay? I think that truly Olive E. Blake is capable of writing beautiful prose randomly inside of her books, but also I feel like sometimes she shows her roots as a fanfic author, and as a result of that, she just doesn't know when to shut the fuck up. It's an impulse that she has that is evident when you read her work, and I do think it produces in almost equal measure both fans and haters. Personally, when it comes to my opinion though, I have always found myself to be somewhere in the middle with her writing style. I always think it's fine once I get into it, but it does take me a little bit of time in the first like 20-30 pages to adjust. You know, let me redraw this. I actually don't think this is accurate. I need to be more specific. This is still true, but it's more like exponential. And then we spend a little bit of time and we start going down like that. And then it kind of levels out. And then we go back up a little bit. And then we go back down. And it's probably like here. Okay, this is more accurate, I think. This is more accurate to my experience. I really liked the establishment of the premise in this story, which was so different than what I got from reading the blurb. This book is about a group of people who, all but one of them, are different paranormal creatures. And they're living in what is basically modern day Chicago with the addition of paranormal creatures. One of them is a vampire who is trying to sell a house. One of them is a poltergeist who was killed in said house and now is refusing to let it be sold until he finds out what the fuck happened to him. One of them is a demon who helps the vampire join a support group for other paranormal creatures who are trying to coexist in modern human society. One of them is the only human in the group, but he also is like kind of immortal, so he's not a normal dude. And he is the adopted godson of Death. And he pretends to be a medium inside of Chicago, even though he doesn't actually have the ability to see or talk with ghosts. He just calls in his dad to do it for him. One of them is that guy's guardian angel. One of them is a reaper that is obviously in love with that guy's guardian angel. And the last one in the main group is this demigod. He's the son of some Norse god that I've since forgotten. So it's a motley crew. They all converge at the start of this book in the mansion that the vampire is trying to sell after she asks for the medium's help in trying to like fix the ghost's problems. And they find out when he's trying to call in his dad to talk to them that Death has gone missing, which could have horrible, horrible consequences for the rest of the world if he's not found. So they have to figure out what to do about that. Cue plot from there. That's the actual premise of this book. I really liked this book up to about what I'm describing, which is maybe, I don't know, page 80, something like that. And I also still liked it past that point a little bit. I thought it was pretty fun. It's got a lot of comedy going on. I mean, the whole situation is entirely ridiculous, and I think that the book leans into that pretty well. And this mystery at the core of the story of where is Death, where has he gone, it felt pretty neat. It's a cool central quest that obviously also has way more detail inside of the book than what I've just described. But I felt at this point that the book was going to be a romp. It was going to be like the book equivalent of a fun road trip with friends. I didn't really think it would take itself particularly seriously at any point because it never really started doing that in the entire opening section. And in some ways, I think that stayed true. I don't think that the book ever took itself perfectly seriously, but it also very quickly stopped being a romp because the plot became completely nonsensical in a way that I think was on purpose, but honestly, I don't know. Like, a part of me feels like I was almost getting trolled when I was reading this book, but there's just enough earnestness going on where I don't really think that's what this was. But without spoiling anything, the bulk of the book, which I guess this is not drawn to scale, but the bulk of the book, the main plot just becomes so vibes oriented to a point where you don't really know anything about what's going on. And there are villains that are introduced, but they're not really characters. They're just kind of generic forces of bad. And you just watch all of the characters one by one try to solve their various internal conflicts utilizing this vibes-oriented system that at no point do you really understand beyond just acknowledging its general capability to be every single plot convenience that would be needed for any of this to happen all at the same time. And then the book is over and you're still kind of confused about what it was all for in the end. And within that structure, as I've tried to notate here, there are still a couple of really nice character moments that happen. There's one interaction in particular at the end that's just super duper sweet that felt like a meaningful and satisfying way to end the story, but it was also so meaningful and satisfying to the point where it almost felt to me like this interaction was the original idea for the entire book. And the rest of it had to be invented so that way ultimately it would be a vessel for this interaction to take place. It's like this one interaction was painted in full vibrant color and it's just in a box on this very whiteboard right here, and everything that is surrounding it is like a poor graphite sketch by a 6-year-old. I'm probably exaggerating, to be honest with you, just because this section of the book was so miserable, but nothing else in the story felt like it justified the amount of pointless meandering that happened inside of this book, which was also especially annoying because nothing like felt pointless. It's not like the book was boring. There was always stuff happening, but all of it ended up feeling so undercooked. Nothing really got there to make all of this worth it outside of this one moment at the very end. I gave this book 2 stars, which feels slightly harsh, honestly, inside of this video, given that I do think I liked reading this more than I liked the other 2-star books. Maybe it's a 2.5. Yeah, let's do that. I just think it tried to do too much. It had too many characters, it had too many relationships to really flesh out any single one of them. And the plot was it was unforgivably convoluted for how simple it also actually was at the end of the book. That's like the real kick in the teeth. It's that none of your confusion actually matters at all because none of your questions matter at all to the story. Like, it's not interested in answering any of your questions because the core of the book is meant to be so simple at the end of the day. I mean, I do still respect the ambition of this book. One thing about Olivia Blake is you can never doubt that she has ambitions with how she wants to tell a story, and I would still read other things by her, and I'll keep feeling that way until I'm given a good reason to feel otherwise. After that, I got through the October Buddy Read pick for my Patreon, which was The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. Very convenient that this won voting, considering the fact that it was also on my previous TBR, so that was cool. This is a literary thriller that's about the disappearance of this 13-year-old girl named Barbara from a summer camp in, I think, the 80s, the 70s maybe? Yeah, okay, it's the mid-70s. But anyways, even worse than the idea that a new child has gone missing is the fact that 15 years prior, the kid who would have been Barbara's older brother also went missing mysteriously and was never found. The book is multiple POV, and there's a decently wide range throughout the story, but the main ones to keep in mind, I would say, are the camp counselor of the missing girl, the mother of the missing girl, and the best friend at that camp of the missing girl. And a bit later, there's also a detective POV that ends up being pretty important as well. I really enjoyed the way that this book was structured. I feel like it did multiple timelines super well, because you're also, while everything is happening at the summer camp, you're going back in time through flashbacks to the previous investigation for the previous missing kid. And so you're jumping around quite a lot. But unlike what I described with Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil, I personally felt like this book did a really good job maintaining a level of tension inside of all of the POVs. So I didn't really care when we left one perspective for a different perspective, because it felt the whole time like you were looking at this one mysterious amorphous thing at the center of the story from a bunch of different angles. And you're trying to figure out what it is using all of these different puzzle pieces from all of these different perspectives. And so I felt that suspense that was building the whole time that I was reading. And I gave this book 4 stars, mostly off of that, off of just having a really nice time reading it. If I'm being completely honest, as I always am here at Lexi, aka Newly Nova, the ending of this book, once you know what happens with both of the central mysteries, was kind of underwhelming. With parts of it especially that just felt like missed opportunities, because you would get this big twist and then you want to see the fallout of that, right? But the book wasn't really interested in telling you about the fallout. It was mostly just interested in delivering the twist. And that was especially underwhelming in this case because this book reads a lot like literary fiction. Just the way that it's written, you get all of these super complex characters that are fleshed out as the mystery is being established and investigated. And compared to most thrillers, you're spending so much time in these people's heads, really digging into their past, understanding the way that they tick, until you're reminded with decisions like what happens around the ending of this book. Oh, I'm reading something that is shelved as mystery thriller. So true. The characters are not, in fact, the #1 priority of this story. Not that mysteries, by the way, can't include full character arcs and explorations into the fallout of the horrible things that happen inside of them, but I don't expect them to in the same way that I expect literary fiction to follow through on exploring its themes and finishing out all of the character journeys. And this book just doesn't really do that, especially with one character in particular who I think was really, really betrayed and failed by how the narrative treats them at the end. So ultimately, for me, I feel like in trying to draw from both being literary fiction and being a mystery, I think it tries really hard to do both of those things a lot of the time, but I don't think it perfectly executes on either of those ambitions. But I still gave it 4 stars because up until the ending, up until maybe the last 30 pages or so of the book, I really, really liked it. I love this exact kind of mystery. Whatever kind of literary suspense bullshit this book is, it's got the same vibe as Notes on an Execution, and I would read 50 of those, honestly. But speaking of Notes on an Execution, if you've read that book and you liked it, I also think that you'll like this. I mean, obviously I thought that Notes was better. It was one of the only books I gave 5 stars last year, and it's also a lot more philosophical than this book is in terms of what it's trying to say. Like, this book has themes, but it's definitely more straightforward and less challenging than Notes was. But if one of the things you liked about Notes was the writing style and the narrative direction, those things are super similar inside of this. So I still think you'll like it, honestly. But if you want a thriller that is a bit more fast-paced, I don't think this is for you. It's pretty slow. It's got a lot of like talking and investigating and thinking again about the myriad situations in our lives that lead us here to this moment. It's definitely a lot less, oh my god, a bunch of shit is happening all of the time and I'm really getting thrilled reading my thriller right now, which I think could make some people find it kind of boring if that's not what they're into. So keep that in mind. Your mileage may vary, but go in with kind of low expectations for the ending, and I think that you could come out positively surprised. Okay, last up, the last thing I read in October, my Halloween book, and also the crown jewel of this video. I finally picked up All Systems Red. This is the first book in the Murderbot Diaries series, which are just all of these adorable little novellas. They're like 100 pages, 150 pages long or something. I don't know. I mean, I read the first one on my Kobo, and I will probably end up buying the box set for the rest of the series. I think this took me like 2.5 hours to read, something like that. It's basically like a movie length experience, except you're reading a book instead. And I mean, I've only read this one, so I don't really know if this is applicable to the series as a whole, but the premise for the first book, this is science fiction. We are following a robot who names itself Murderbot, and Murderbot is a security robot that is assigned as a rental for various groups that want to go off and do things that will require protection. So it's like you're an organization that wants to go off to a planet and mine its resources. Well, you can rent all of the gear that you could possibly need to do that from this intergalactic company. And they'll also give you security robots that will protect you from whatever like evil local alien fauna could possibly hurt you. But Murderbot is different among security robots because it has achieved sentience, basically. It's hacked its own command module and rendered it completely defunct. So it doesn't have to take orders from anybody. Not the company, not the clients of the company that rent out Murderbot to like protect them or whatever. And that would maybe be really dangerous for a robot that goes by Murderbot and has guns built into its arms. But fortunately for the world at large, the only thing that Murderbot wants to do with its newly achieved free will is just watch copious amounts of TV, like futuristic soap operas. And it turns out that the best way to do that without getting like decommissioned and stripped for parts because you've been found out to have gone rogue is to pretend to still be normal. So it goes where it's told to go, mostly does its job, and just surreptitiously watches a bunch of TV whenever nobody's around. And at the beginning of All Systems Red, Murderbot is on a project with a bunch of scientists who are taking samples and studying this new planet to try to figure out if it has resources that are worth sending further expeditions to bring back, basically. And it's a small team. They're relatively chill. They're not like super annoying as clients usually go in how they use Murderbot. But then it quickly becomes apparent that someone or something is out to get them, and they're all in extreme danger. And unfortunately for Murderbot, at this point in the mission, it kind of likes these people and doesn't want to just like let them die. So it's pushed into this position where it has to protect them from this mysterious danger that they don't even really understand. I loved this. I loved it. I have nothing negative to say about this book. It was a super easy 5-star. I don't know, man. This is cozy fantasy by my standards, which nobody else uses, and you should not take as an accurate benchmark. This is what I find cozy. This is the kind of stuff that relaxes me, honestly. The whole book is first person, and Murderbot is just such a fun narrator. And as a Rue relator, we talked earlier in this video about that, I also really found myself relating in strange and unusual ways to Murderbot as somebody who is also super introverted. I loved watching Murderbot navigate in really funny ways all of these completely mundane situations that just made it viscerally uncomfortable all the time. And also, along the way, you end up having this like really meaningful arc through the book because Murderbot doesn't really know what its purpose is, you know? I mean, it's kind of uncharted territory. What do you really do as a sentient robot in a world where nobody knows that you're sentient and presumably there are no other sentient robots? Like, what is your purpose supposed to be, if you even have one? Like, how do you define an identity when you are not supposed to exist the way that you are? All of those existential questions and more are woven so intelligently into this, again, super brief novella for everything that's covering. Not to mention also that the mystery thriller part of this book is super fascinating. I was really, really into figuring out just what was going on and what would happen to everybody. The side cast of characters, phenomenal. The dialogue, fantastic. And I felt at the end of this book like I had just watched an absolutely fantastic movie. That's, I think, the best way to describe the feeling of going through it. Again, I have nothing negative to say about this. There was not a single moment reading this book where I felt bored or that I wasn't into it. And if you recall what I said earlier at the beginning of this video about my reading goal and how it can still be saved, there are like 7 more of these. There's a big ass box set at the bookstore that I've made charged eye contact with a couple of times over the past few months before ultimately deciding it would be wiser to just purchase the first one as an ebook. But I totally could have just bought all of them because this fucked. It was awesome. Would strongly recommend. I loved this. I don't think it's really like anything else I've ever read in the genre, honestly, so it's kind of hard to think about what to compare it to in order to recommend it to you. It's kind of like this is so niche. The sidecast and community of my life as a teenage exocolonist, the video game, combined with the kind of sardonic, self-hating internal monologue of Harrow from Gideon the Ninth, and then with the existential questions of A Psalm for the Wild Built, and also a similar length, since that's also a novella. I feel like that, as a collective, is the best that I can do, but it's also not really like any of those things, because the best part of this story is that it is so spectacularly its own thing. Would strongly recommend if you have any remote interest in sci-fi at all. I loved it. I thought it was great. Okay. That's everything. We have done it. We have made it through. Thank you guys for listening. I hope you're doing well. As always, I would love to know what you guys read this month. Let me know if there's anything that I should put on my radar to try to get through in between 1 and 3 calendar years. My usual timeline for a recommendation germinating inside of my brain. But yeah, stay warm, stay sexy, stay safe. I hope you guys have a good night. Okay, I don't have anything else to say. Bye!